This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden's urging the Senate to swiftly pass the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. After West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin's surprise announcement this week that he would support a budget reconciliation package to combat the climate crisis while lowering health care costs. The bill represents just a fraction of the more than $3 trillion sought by progressive Democrats in 2020. But Biden said Thursday the deal would still be the most important climate legislation ever passed by Congress.
This bill is far from perfect. It's a compromise. But it's often how progress is made, by compromises. This bill would be the most significant legislation in history to tackle the climate crisis and improve our energy security right away.
The package includes nearly $370 billion in new spending on climate and energy over the next 10 years, but environmentalists warn it contains poison pills for the climate, like a requirement that the Interior Department open up millions of acres of public lands to new oil and gas development as a prerequisite to installing any new solar or wind energy. The Center for Biological Diversity said in a statement, the new leasing required in this bill will fan the flames of the climate disasters torching our country, and it's a slap in the face to the communities fighting to protect themselves from filthy fossil fuels, they said. We'll have more on the emerging legislation later in the broadcast, but we're joined right now by Leah Stokes, who advised Senate Democrats on the bill, Associate Professor of Environmental Politics at University of California, Santa Barbara, researcher on climate and energy policy. It's great to have you back, Professor. What happened? I mean, the shock waves that went through Washington when the Democrat who was torpedoing this bill turned around and said he would support it. We're talking Joe Manchin. What happened? You were working behind the scenes.
Well, you know, it was really shocking. And I think the last 2 weeks when we thought the entire deal had fallen apart, they were really painful. You know, facing the prospect of absolutely no climate investments out of D.C. yet again, we're talking about decades of attempts to do this. It was devastating. We just do not have another decade left to wait if we really want to be on track to cut carbon pollution in half this decade, which is what scientists say we need to do and what President Biden has pledged to do. But it turns out that, you know, a lot of the public work saying that what Senator Manchin was doing was not okay, whether that was folks in West Virginia arguing that he needed to make sure that former mine workers had the right health care support, or, you know, climate activists saying we cannot torch the planet, not just for all of us, but also for Senator Joe Manchin's grandchildren. I think that that pressure maybe got to him a little bit, and he didn't want to have his legacy be one of climate destruction.
So lay out exactly what has passed and what didn't. It hasn't been voted on yet, but what is in this bill?
I like your thinking, Amy.
What is in this bill and what isn't?
Yes. So, you know, the bill passed the House of Representatives last fall and included $555 billion in clean energy and climate investments. The good news is that a lot of that has remained intact in this final Senate version. So we're clocking in at $369 billion. And a lot of the changes between the two bills are mostly shaving, you know, the amount for a specific program, you know, tweaking the language, but not getting rid of wholesale programs. There were some full losses, such as the Civilian Climate Corps that the Sunrise Movement championed, but a lot of the provisions that we needed are still in there. So how can we break that down for folks? Well, first, there's a bunch of consumer-facing incentives to reduce energy bills. It turns out that 41% of inflation right now is being driven by fossil fuels. So what this bill would do is make it cheaper to get an electric vehicle, a heat pump, which is a really efficient electric appliance that both heats and cools your home. And for low and moderate income folks, it would even help get you know, an induction stove, which is, again, a really important piece of technology to cut carbon pollution and energy bills at the same time. So we know that if folks adopt these technologies that the bill is going to make cheaper, it will actually save them $1,800 a year in their energy bills. That's according to an analysis from Rewiring America. And, you know, that's not surprising because it costs about $1 a gallon to drive an EV versus about $4 or $5 a gallon for a gas-powered powered car. So we're talking about really delivering a lot of savings with these clean energy technologies for everyday Americans. And I can get into the other details, but I'll just pause there because it's a really big bill, so I don't want to overwhelm you, Amy.
Well, Professor Stokes, what about environmentalists' warning of the bill containing poison pills, like this quote I just read from the Center for Biological Diversity, who said the new leasing required in the bill will fan the flames of the climate disasters torching our country, a slap in the face of communities fighting to protect themselves from filthy fossil fuels?
Yeah, like all bills that potentially become law, it's not perfect, right? And we cannot let perfect be the enemy of the good here. These lease sales are very problematic. The basic idea is that they require a minimum amount of lease sales every year. I looked at what the historic level of sales were, both for onshore and offshore, and it's about a quarter lower when it comes to offshore lease sales than the historic 10-year average before the pandemic, and about half of the onshore lease sales. So, it's still lower than what we've been seeing on average under the Obama administration and the Trump administration, but it's not ideal. We do not want to be doing required lease sales. There are, however, some other changes in the bill that pull us in the other direction, such as royalty rate increases. And, what we're really trying to do here is reduce demand for fossil fuels by helping Americans get access to clean energy technologies that run off of electricity and not off of fossil fuels. And so what the idea will hopefully be is that we're going to reduce our demand for fossil fuels, and that will make leasing onshore and offshore less profitable. But no, this is not the bill that, I would have written personally. It's going to have some bad ramifications for communities on the front lines of drilling, and that is not good. But we cannot miss the forest for the trees here. We have to be clear-eyed. We're talking about a bill that will reduce carbon pollution 40% below 2005 levels by 2030, which will get us 80% of the way to President Biden's goal and towards what climate scientists say we need to do. So it's not perfect, but these provisions, the modeling that I've seen sort of preliminarily, they're going to add about 1% out of that 40% in the bad direction. So we can think of it as saying, for example, the good stuff is something like 10 to 20 times bigger than the bad stuff when it comes to carbon pollution.
Well, I want to bring in another guest here. On Capitol Hill, 6 congressional staffers were arrested Monday as they held a nonviolent civil disobedience protest inside the office of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. The staffers were calling on Schumer to reopen negotiations on the bill to combat the climate crisis. We're joined now by one of those staffers who was arrested. Saul Levin helped to organize the direct action in Schumer's office. Saul, welcome to Democracy Now! Now, you're a Democratic staffer. And I wonder if this could have played a role in Manchin reversing this kind of action inside Congress. Explain why you targeted not the Republicans, but, yes, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, well, thanks, Amy. Part of this action was kind of an alarm bell that we were ringing from the inside, where we were kind of trying to direct people towards the Senate Majority Leader and frankly, the President of the United States to say, these are the folks who need to be negotiating like our lives depend on passing climate policy this year, which they do. And so we've seen, Senator Manchin go back and forth with industry and everything else. And we really thought that what was needed here was a boost for Senator Schumer to keep negotiating, to not get discouraged, to keep going, because we have absolutely no option. And keep in mind, there's a huge age divide here. We hope that this had an impact, but there's hundreds of congressional staffers who are doing different things to try and get this bill back to life, because we're going to live through the climate crisis. We already are. Some of us are hoping to have kids, I'm hoping my goddaughter is going to grow up in a livable world, and we weren't on track for that. Hopefully now we're a little bit more so.
Now, Saul, we just spoke to your father, Andy Levin, who's running for re-election on Tuesday in the primary. He was arrested twice last week. You were arrested once. There are a lot of arrests in your family. But if you can talk about why you decided to go this far and now to identify yourself, because in letters you had to senators, initially you just used your initials. Why now come forward?
Yeah, well, people, many of us came forward, and Amy, there were 17 staffers who were in the room. Only 6 ended up getting arrested. We came forward because we felt like we didn't have a choice. There are, as mentioned, hundreds of congressional staffers, members of Congress who have been working for 18 months or, a bit more than that to pass climate policy during these precious 2 years of Democrats in power. And nothing has happened. And we felt like, we couldn't in good faith leave for, go on vacation without passing climate policy. And so the first step was to say, we'll take some risks. We'll do some things that we're not supposed to do. We're not comfortable doing. We're not supposed to be the people on these TV shows, but it's so bad, the notion that we're not going to pass climate policy, that we had to step out briefly and say, wait a second, if we do something weird, maybe this will draw the attention and spark the folks who do have more say, who are in the seats of power, to do something unusual too, to get this done.
So Saul Levin is a congressional staffer and coordinator of the Congressional Progressive Staff Association Climate Working Group, who helped to organize the climate emergency direct action in Senator Chuck Schumer's office, got arrested with 5 others, is also a congressional aide to Congressmember Cori Bush. And I am wondering, Professor Stokes, how important was this action, do you think, and actions like these, the level of activism of congressional staff, not to mention Congress members, but the staff who've been putting enormous pressure to get climate action done?
Yeah, of course, I know Saul Levin, and I really was heartened by the action that they took. So many of us felt that despair when the negotiations fell apart. I certainly was crying, and several members of the staff and Congress were crying as well. And we weren't doing that for some kind of personal reason, in terms of the work that people had put in. It was because we understood the stakes. Failure is not an option right now. We had 100 million Americans under extreme heat last week, and we're about to see those kinds of record temperatures across the country again today. We have 60 million Americans experiencing a once in a 1,200-year mega drought in the West right now. We're seeing extreme flooding in Kentucky and Missouri. This is just terrible, and we cannot just watch the climate crisis unfold like Saul was talking about and not actually do something about it. So there are so many people working in Congress, the staff that Saul just elevated, who have been working really hard. That includes a number of staffers in Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's office who haven't even taken paternity leave since they had small children. And, I got to tell you, I came on your show exactly 1 year ago today, and then I was in the hospital. And then I had my own children, twins, and I have not gone on leave since then, really, because this climate bill is just too important. We have got to get it over the finish line. So I'm really grateful for all the folks working in Congress to get it over the finish line in the coming weeks.
We just have 30 seconds. I know you're in Michigan, Saul, but if you can talk about the climate protesters who got arrested last night outside the congressional baseball game and fundraiser as they tried to block the entrance to the Nationals Park. I mean, this is happening at every level now.
Absolutely. Well, I think, we were not coordinated with them, but I think at all levels, people are rising up and saying, we need more climate justice investments immediately on an absolute emergency basis. As Leah mentioned, there's, been heat waves all over the country that are unprecedented, other than the fact that they've happened in recent years as the climate crisis has escalated. But, the consistency between our protests and the protest at the baseball game is that people all over the world are rising up and saying, we're going to live through this, and our leaders are not moving fast enough. We're hoping, we're still looking at the details and hoping to move forward with climate policy this year, but this new package is not anywhere close to the level of funding that we need. This is not a Green New Deal or Build Back Better. And so people need to keep pushing and pushing for more, whatever ways they can.
I want to thank you both for being with us. The signs that were held, Democrats seal the deal, and talking about a climate emergency at Nationals Park. Saul Levin, congressional staffer for Congressmember Cori Bush and coordinator of the Congressional Progressive Staff Association Climate Working Group, one of 6 staffers arrested in a climate emergency direct action in Senator Schumer's office, and Leah Stokes, associate professor of environmental politics at University of California, Santa Barbara, author of Short Circuiting Policy and co-host of the podcast a matter of degrees. Next up, we look at two threats facing the nation's imprisoned population: intensifying heat waves and monkeypox. Stay with us. Back in 30 seconds.